A single boot, German issue, sitting upright in the mud outside a farmhouse near the Moselle River, November 1944. Inside that boot, a foot that still had its sock on. Its owner was never found. That detail, recovered in an after-action report filed by Captain James F. Leach, 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, tells you almost everything you need to know about what happened in the 72 hours that preceded it. Not the sanitized version. Not the version where the plan worked, and the men cheered and the flag went up clean. The real version, the one headquarters didn't fully understand until weeks later, the one the Germans understood immediately and never stopped being embarrassed by. Here is what we know happened on November 8, 1944, in the fog-strangled corridor east of Aracourt, France. 12 American soldiers, cut off, outnumbered by a force 3 times their size, with one radio that worked intermittently and ammunition enough for perhaps 40 minutes of sustained fire, took a fortified German supply bridge that Wehrmacht planners had declared impregnable. They took it in the dark. They took it without armored support. And they took it in a way that so thoroughly violated the logic of what the German defenders had prepared for, that the officer commanding those defenders, Oberstleutnant Werner Vogt, a decorated veteran of the Eastern Front, reportedly tore his operational map off the wall and told his adjutant, "These men have not read the rules." He meant it as an insult. History recorded it as a compliment. The question this story asks and answers is deceptively simple. What happens when soldiers trained by a general who despised conventional thinking meet an enemy who has built every defense around conventional expectations? What happens is the war changes overnight, and the Germans never see it coming. By October 1944, General George S. Patton's Third Army had driven 600 miles in 90 days. 600 miles through France, through heat and dust and shattered supply lines, at a speed that Wehrmacht planners in Berlin called, in classified communications, operationally impossible. They used that phrase not in admiration but in confusion. The Germans had wargamed the Allied advance. They had modeled it. They had built their defensive lines in Lorraine with a specific timetable in mind, a timetable based on what they knew of American doctrine, American logistics, American caution. Patton didn't care about their timetable. But by November, even Patton's fury had limits. The fuel had run out. The ammunition trains were 2 weeks behind. The autumn rains had turned Lorraine into a grey soup of mud and misery, and SHAEF Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force had throttled Third Army's advance in favor of Montgomery's thrust in the north. Patton was constrained, caged. And in the particular way that a caged animal is more dangerous than a free one, this constraint made what came next more lethal, not less. The bridge at Pont St. Vincent sat 12 miles northeast of Nancy, spanning the Moselle River at its narrowest crossing point in the sector. Think about what that means tactically. In November 1944, with Third Army pressing toward the German border, every river crossing was a choke point. Every bridge was a throat. The Wehrmacht understood this perfectly. They had mined the far bank, fortified the eastern approach with interlocking fields of fire from 2 reinforced machine gun nests, positioned a company of panzer grenadiers, roughly 180 men, in the village of Fontenoy-sur-Moselle on the hill overlooking the crossing, and established a supply depot in the cellars beneath the bridge itself. Ammunition, fuel, medical stores, everything a retreating army needs to make its next stand. Destroy or capture Pont St. Vincent, and you collapse the German logistics spine for 40 kilometers in every direction. Captain James F. Leach knew this because he had been told it 3 times by 3 different intelligence officers, each of whom had given him a slightly different version of the same story. Leach, 31 years old, from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, had been with the 37th Tank Battalion since North Africa. He was not a dramatic man. His men described him in the language of soldiers as someone who thought before he spoke and moved before he was told. He carried 2 things in his breast pocket at all times: a worn copy of Patton's operational memorandum on armored assault tactics, and a photograph of his wife Elena and their daughter Ruth, age 4, standing in front of a house on Chestnut Street that he had not seen in 2 years. His unit for this operation, 12 men. A reduced section from Baker Company, depleted by the fighting around Aracourt in September. Staff Sergeant Donald Curry, 26 Cleveland, Corporal Miguel Santos, 22 San Antonio, Private First Class Harold Wick, 19, a farm boy from Dubuque who had never been east of Chicago before the Army put him on a boat. 8 others named in the after-action report, whose families recognized those names in the newspaper months later. The plan headquarters had given Leach was not complicated. Move east on the secondary road, link up with a French resistance contact named only as Renard, the Fox, who would guide them to a concealed approach on the bridge's western bank. Strike at 300, neutralize the guards, signal the follow-on armor. Done. The plan had one flaw that headquarters didn't know about, a flaw no map could show, a flaw that would not become visible until the moment Leach's boots hit the road east of Nancy on the night of November 7, 1944. 12 miles northeast, in the command post he had established in the stone presbytery of Fontenoy-sur-Moselle, Oberstleutnant Werner Vogt was finishing his evening situation report. Vogt was 44, a professional soldier who had served at Kursk and Kharkov and survived both. He was not a fool. But he had been told by intelligence summaries from Army Group G that the American unit approaching his sector was a depleted reconnaissance element, perhaps a dozen men at most, conducting what the summary called a probing action of limited strategic intent. Vogt's adjutant Hauptmann Friedrich Bauer read the summary aloud and then asked his commander if additional reserves should be requested. Vogt shook his head. "A dozen Americans," he said, "are not a threat. They are an inconvenience. By dawn they will either be dead or retreating." He said it without contempt, just the flat certainty of a man who had fought real enemies on the Eastern Front and had learned to calibrate his concern accordingly. American soldiers, in his professional assessment, were well equipped but inexperienced, brave enough in the open, dangerous with air support, but in the dark, on foot, against prepared positions. He went to sleep at 2200 hours. He would not sleep again for 41 hours. They left the staging area at 21:30 on November 7th. The rain had stopped 2 hours earlier, which should have been good news. It wasn't. The mud had already done its work. The secondary road east of Nancy, designated Route Secondaire 14 on the operational map Leach carried, was on that map a road. On the ground it was a canal, wheel ruts 3 feet deep, a ditch where the shoulder should have been. The map was 6 weeks old, printed from aerial photographs taken in September when the ground was still dry. Leach knew immediately. Every soldier who has ever navigated by a map that doesn't match the ground knows the feeling, not panic, but a specific, cold alertness. The map is wrong, which means the assumptions built on the map are wrong, which means everything downstream of those assumptions needs to be questioned. He kept moving. Renard was supposed to meet them at a crossroads 2 kilometers east of the village of Sex-Yorks Forges. The crossroads was there, a stone marker, a rusted iron cross, exactly where the map said it would be. Renard was not. Leach waited 20 minutes. He sent Santos 50 meters up each road to look and listen. Nothing, no contact, no signal, no indication that anyone had been at that crossroads recently except the rain. Staff Sergeant Curry came to stand beside him. "He's not coming, sir." "No," Leach said, "he's not." What Leach didn't know, what no one in Baker Company knew until the post-battle debrief in December, was that Renard had been arrested by the Gestapo 4 days earlier. His contact network in the Moselle Valley had been rolled up by a counterintelligence sweep. The coordinates he had passed to OSS handlers before his capture were not wrong exactly. They were 8 days out of date. The concealed approach on the western bank of the Moselle that Renard had scouted in late October had by November 7th been discovered by a German patrol and blocked with concertina wire and 2 Teller mines. But the section didn't know that yet. They were still moving. The ambush hit at 47, 300 meters from the bridge. There is a specific sound that soldiers describe when speaking of the first moment of contact, not the sound of the weapons themselves, but the sound of the air a fraction of a second before. A compression, a held breath. Private First Class Harold Wick described it later to his family in a letter dated December 1944. It is like the whole world clears its throat. And then it starts talking all at once, very loud, and you realize you have been standing in the middle of a conversation you didn't know was happening. 3 MG-42s, pre-sighted positions, a kill zone that covered every approach to the road junction. The first burst took Corporal Santos in the left leg and spun him into the ditch. The second burst, the Germans adjusting, caught Private Robert Kessler, 20 years old from Newark, in the shoulder and hip as he tried to drag Santos under cover. The third burst went high over everyone's head, which told Leach something important even in that first second of chaos. The Germans were firing on sound and muzzle flash. They didn't have good visual, which meant it was dark enough still to move. DOWN move, get off the road. 8 seconds of coherent thought in 40 seconds of fire. Leach counted his men as they scrambled into the tree-lined Santos, being dragged by Curry, Wick moving fast. Kessler down, still breathing, not moving under his own power. 5 others, the 3 rearmost soldiers, were gone, pinned behind the last bend in the road, cut off. The radio crackled at 59. Leach's operator, Private James Dubicki, 23, Chicago, pressed the handset to his ear and looked up at his captain with an expression that soldiers recognize immediately, the look of a man delivering news he would rather not deliver. Sir, battalion's changing the objective. Leach stared at him. Say again. New orders from Colonel Abrams, sir. Intel says the Germans are pulling back across the sector. They want us to bypass the bridge, push east to Liverdun, link up with Charlie Company. Bridge is secondary now. Santos was bleeding through Curry's field dressing. Kessler hadn't moved. 3 men were unaccounted for somewhere behind them on a road that was now a firebase. And headquarters, looking at a situation map that bore no relationship to the ground under Leach's boots, was telling him to leave. Leach took the handset. He confirmed the order. He handed it back to Dubicki. Then he looked at Curry. Curry looked at him. Neither spoke, because here is the thing about orders that change mid-mission based on intelligence that is demonstrably wrong. They create a choice that no training manual fully addresses. The order is legal. The order is from a superior. The order is also based on information that the man receiving it knows with absolute certainty to be false. The Germans were not pulling back across this sector. The Germans were right here. 100 meters away through the trees, behind 3 machine guns, waiting for the Americans to move again. In the command post at Fontenoy, Hauptmann Bauer received the field report at 1:15. Contact made, Americans pinned, retreating into the tree line. He wrote in his log, enemy force approximately 10 to 15 men, light weapons, disorganized. Recommend holding fire until withdrawal is confirmed. No armored support observed. Threat assessment minimal. Oberstleutnant Vogt read the report. Nodded, did not wake the reserve platoon, did not request reinforcement, did not adjust his defensive perimeter. He had prepared for the Americans who followed the plan. He had not prepared for a captain from Harrisburg who had just decided in a muddy tree line outside Fontenoy-sur-Moselle to ignore the plan entirely. A like on this video cost you 2 seconds. For James Leach and the 11 men in that tree line, 2 seconds is the least we can do. Patton had a phrase he used so often that officers under his command could recite it in their sleep. He used it in briefings. He put it in operational memoranda. He said it to reporters, to politicians, to junior lieutenants who showed up to headquarters confused about why they were being ordered to do something that looked insane on paper. Do not take counsel of your fears. It sounds like a motivational poster. It is not. Understand what Patton actually meant, because the distinction matters enormously for what happened in that tree line. He was not talking about bravery. He was not talking about ignoring danger. He was making a precise tactical argument that when a soldier or a commander begins making decisions based on what they fear the enemy will do, rather than on what the enemy has actually revealed about themselves through their behavior, that soldier has handed the initiative to the enemy. Fear in Patton's operational philosophy was information about yourself. The enemy's actions were information about them. And the enemy's actions always told you more about their vulnerabilities than any intelligence report ever could. Leach had read that memorandum 40 times. He read it the way a craftsman studies a technical manual, not for inspiration but for application. And in the tree line outside Fontenoy, with Santos bleeding and Kessler unable to move and 3 machine guns between him and the bridge, he applied it. He read what the Germans had told him. 3 MG-42 positions pre-sighted on the road, which meant the Germans had prepared for an approach along the road. The Germans had not prepared for an approach that wasn't along the road, or they would have put those guns somewhere else. The initial burst had gone high when the section left the road surface, which meant the German gunners were oriented toward the road, their ranging calculations built around the road, their fields of fire optimized for the road. 100 meters east of his position, through a pine forest that the map didn't show because it hadn't existed in September. It was a replanted area 12 to 15 years old, tightly packed, was the eastern bank of the Moselle upstream of the bridge. The Germans had prepared for the plan. They had not prepared for a man who had abandoned the plan, but here is where the civilian element entered. Between the tree line and the upstream bank there was a farmhouse. Leach could see the light, a candle or oil lamp behind a shuttered window, visible as a thin line of yellow in the dark. Someone was inside, a family almost certainly. The farmer, whoever he was, had not evacuated. In the Moselle Valley in November 1944, many civilians had not evacuated. They had no transport, or they had elderly relatives, or they had simply waited too long and the front had moved past them, and they were now inside a battle they hadn't chosen. Leach's approach route to the upstream bank ran within 20 meters of that farmhouse. If he moved his men along that route, crashing through pine saplings, a wounded man being carried, the noise might wake whoever was inside. If the farmer opened a shutter, showed a light, called out, the German gunners would hear it, would respond. The family would be in the middle of a firefight they had done nothing to invite. He sent Wick ahead alone. The order, get to the farmhouse. Knock quietly. Explain in whatever French a farm boy from Dubuque could produce that there were American soldiers outside and they needed the light out and the shutters closed and complete silence for the next 40 minutes. If there were any German soldiers inside or if the family had any communication with the German position, the mission was over. Wick came back in 12 minutes. He reported one elderly woman. Her husband had been taken for labor detail 6 weeks ago. No Germans. She had understood enough or had seen enough in 2 years of occupation to know what to do. The light went out before Wick had finished talking. She had blown out the candle herself. That woman, her name was never recorded in any document Leach filed, identified in later accounts only as a widow of approximate age 65 to 70, made the next 40 minutes possible. If the stories coming out of this channel stay with you, the real stories, the ones that don't make the headlines, the channel that finds them needs your subscription to keep going. Hit subscribe. Let's continue. 148 hours. The pine forest was thick enough to muffle sound but not to eliminate it. Leach moved his 7 able-bodied men. Curry carried Kessler's weight across one shoulder, through the trees in a line, each man's hand on the shoulder of the man ahead. No light, no radio. The 3 men left behind on the road had instructions. Hold position, make noise periodically, give the impression the section was still pinned. They were buying time. Whether they were buying it successfully, Leach had no way of knowing. The upstream bank was exactly where Leach's terrain reading said it would be. A low embankment 3 feet above the waterline, overgrown with dead sedge grass, invisible from the bridge position because the bridge curved slightly south and a stand of willows blocked the sightline. The Moselle at this point was perhaps 40 meters wide. The current was moving. The water temperature in November on the Moselle was cold enough that immersion without preparation meant incapacitation within minutes. There was a boat, a flat-bottomed punt chain-locked to an iron stake driven into the bank, half full of rainwater, large enough to carry 4 men if they didn't breathe too deeply. Leach looked at it, Curry looked at it, Wick looked at it. Can we fit Kessler? Leach asked. If we sit him up in the bow, Curry said. How bad is he? Curry didn't answer immediately. That was an answer. We need him moving when we hit the other side, Leach said. Whether or not he can. 2 crossings. First, Leach Santos, who could manage with his wounded leg if he didn't have to bear weight, Wick, and one other. They belayed out the punt with their helmets. 12 minutes to cross and return. The current was stronger than it looked, and Leach spent the entire crossing calculating what he could see of the eastern bank. Stone embankment, 3 steps leading up a road running north toward the bridge, a low wall on the far side that would provide cover for approximately 6 men standing. They made the eastern bank at 2:13, 40 meters below the bridge. Here is what German Oberstleutnant Vogt had prepared on the eastern bank: nothing, not because he was incompetent, because he had done the math correctly, based on the wrong variables. An American force of 12 men, he had calculated, would not risk a river crossing under fire. It was tactically unsound. The manual said so, his experience said so. An assault force that small in the dark, with a defended bridge within earshot of reinforcements, did not cross rivers. They found cover and waited for support. This was rational. This was predictable. This was exactly what Vogt would have done. In Hauptmann Bauer's log, at 2:15 hours, an entry: no further contact from American position. Possible withdrawal, will confirm at first light. Leach was 40 meters from the bridge's eastern foundation when the second crossing brought Curry, Kessler, and the remaining 3. Now 8 men, 1 severely wounded, 1 with a leg wound, ammunition assessed at roughly 1 magazine per man plus 2 grenades each, no radio contact, no support, no information about what was waiting in the supply depot under the bridge. Kessler looked at Leach in the dark. Leach had served with Kessler since Tunisia. He knew the look. The man was operating on adrenaline and nothing else. "Tell me what you need," Leach said quietly. "Just don't leave me behind this time," Kessler said. This was a reference to a moment in the Iraq court fighting in September that Leach would never discuss in any interview or document for the rest of his life. "Not a chance," Leach said. They moved north along the wall. The supply depot entrance was a wooden door set into the stone arch beneath the bridge's eastern anchor point. The 2 guards, standard rotation. Leach counted their movement for 4 minutes before he moved. The guards were walking a circuit of 60 meters, turning at the far end, returning. 12 seconds between them when one turned and the other hadn't yet reached the midpoint. 12 seconds. Santos and Wick, the 2 quietest men in the section, moved at 2:31. Leach watched, held his breath, counted. 12 seconds. No shot, no shout. The door opened from inside at 2:34. Santos's face in the gap. 12 of them down here, sir. All asleep. 12 German soldiers off duty, sleeping in the warmth of the supply depot. Fuel drums, ammunition crates, medical supplies. And 12 men who woke up with American rifles in their faces and to a man made the correct decision. But the noise, the sound of voices, of men waking suddenly, of equipment clattering, carried up through the stone structure of the bridge. And the MG-42 crew on the western bank heard it. Everything happened in the next 4 minutes. The machine gun opened up on the eastern bank at 2:36. Firing blind, firing at sound and instinct, but firing accurately enough that it pinned Leach's 3 men at the wall outside the depot entrance. Curry took a round through the meat of his right forearm, not bone, but enough to put him on one knee. Wick dragged him back to the wall. Leach was inside the depot doorway, counting ammunition crates, doing a kind of arithmetic that only soldiers understand. What do I have? What do I need? And how long can I hold this before someone figures out what's happening and brings real force against it? His assessment: 20 minutes, maybe less. The German reserve platoon at Fontenoy was a kilometer away. When the MG crew radioed in, and they would, within seconds, that platoon would move. 180 men against 8, with Curry one-handed and Kessler propped against a stone pillar with a rifle he could barely lift. At 2:38, Leach made a decision that is still discussed in military history courses. He ordered Dubicki to set fire to 3 fuel drums at the depot's far end, not the whole depot. 3 drums positioned in the corner furthest from the ammunition crates, with enough distance that the explosion, and there would be an explosion, would be directed outward, eastward, away from the bridge structure itself, into the open ground between the depot and the road to Fontenoy, not destroying the bridge, not destroying the supplies, but creating, at 2:39 in the morning, on November 8, 1944, a column of fire 40 feet high that was visible, according to later accounts, from 6 kilometers away, including from the 3rd Army liaison post at Laneuville-Devant, Nancy, where a signals officer named Lieutenant Paul Greer was supposed to be sleeping. but was instead monitoring the radio net because he had heard the machine gun fire from the bridge sector and something about the pattern of it was wrong. Greer saw the fire, he knew the coordinates. He got on the radio to Colonel Creighton Abrams at 2:41 and said 7 words, "Someone is at Pont St. Vincent, Eastern Bank." Abrams, the same Abrams who had ordered Leach to bypass the bridge 2 hours earlier, based on intelligence that was wrong, looked at the map, looked at the fire, and immediately understood that someone in his command had ignored his orders, crossed a river in the dark and lit a bonfire to tell him about it. "Get armor moving," Abrams said. Now, the reserve platoon from Fontenoy arrived at the bridge's eastern approach at 2:51. 117 men, the full platoon minus those on perimeter, moving fast, rifles up, confident. They found 8 Americans in a fortified stone position with 120 German prisoners and control of the ammunition depot, backed by the visible and very real threat of more explosions, and they made the same calculation Leach had made looking at the boat on the upstream bank. The math does not favor us. At 3:04, the first American M4 Sherman from Baker Company's follow-on element crossed the Pont St. Vincent from the western bank. The bridge had not been blown. The supplies were intact, the crossing was open. In Fontenoy's command post, Hauptmann Bauer wrote in his log at 3:07, "Bridge lost, eastern bank lost, reserve platoon unable to engage due to prisoner situation and fire risk to ammunition stocks, request immediate reinforcement." The request was denied. There were no reinforcements to send. The German line in the Moselle Valley had just broken at its center, and everyone from Army Group G down knew it. Vogt, standing at his window watching the Sherman cross his bridge, said nothing for a long time. Then he turned to Bauer and spoke the words that ended up in Bauer's post-war memoir, published in 1963, "I prepared for the soldiers they trained, not for the soldiers they became." The bridge at Pont St. Vincent looked in the first light of November 8 like the ending of something, which it was. Leach walked it at 600 when the light was grey enough to see by. He counted the debris, German equipment abandoned in the rush, a field telephone. Ammunition pouches with the flaps still snapped shut, dropped by men who ran before they thought. A letter in German blown against the stone railing, later translated by a division interpreter as a soldier's note to his mother, complaining about the cold and the food and asking whether the cherry tree in the garden had survived the autumn. It was unsigned. The interpreter kept it. Kessler was evacuated to the 4th Armored Division's field hospital at 7:15. He survived. He returned to the United States in March 1945. He is not famous. His name appears in one after-action report and in the memory of 7 men who were in a boat with him at 2:13 on a November morning. Curry lost the use of 2 fingers on his right hand. He continued in service until the Germans' surrender in May 1945. He became a machinist in Cleveland after the war. He died in 1989. The enemy's accounting of what happened at Pont St. Vincent did not remain secret for long. When Army Group G's sector after-action reviews were captured with German First Army records in the spring of 1945, analysts found a summary, dated November 12, 1944, 4 days after the bridge, that addressed the Pont St. Vincent incident directly. The summary was written by a general staff officer attempting to understand how 12 men had succeeded, where, by every defensible calculation, they should have failed. The summary's conclusion, translated and quoted in the official U.S. Army Historical Review, the American assault demonstrated a willingness to abandon the prepared plan entirely when ground conditions contradicted staff assumptions. This quality, which our Eastern Front veterans recognize as dangerous, appears to be systematically cultivated in units operating under Third Army's command philosophy. We have consistently underestimated the degree to which American junior officers have been trained to think independently of their orders. Vogt himself was interviewed after the war by American military historians in 1947. He was 60 years old and living in Freiburg. He was asked what he would have done differently. He thought about the question for a long time. Then he said, "I would have remembered that a man who has nothing left to lose and knows exactly what he is doing is the most dangerous thing on a battlefield, not a tank, not an artillery barrage." A man with a clear mind and a decision already made. Patton received the report on Pont St. Vincent on November 9th. His response documented in his diary. Leach used the river as a road when the road became a trap. That is the whole of it. He put Leach in for the Silver Star, which was approved in December. At the ceremony, Patton looked at Leach for a moment and said, in the way that Patton said things that were meant to be remembered, "The only thing the enemy can never plan for is a man who changes his mind faster than they can write their orders." The lesson of Pont St. Vincent is not about bravery, though there was plenty of that in the dark outside Fontenoy-sur-Moselle on November 8, 1944. The lesson is about what Patton spent 3 years trying to build into every officer and NCO in the Third Army, the capacity to read an obstacle not as a barrier but as information. The road was wrong. Good, the road told you where not to be. The contact didn't show. Good, the contact told you the plan was compromised. The machine guns fired high. Good, they told you the enemy was blind. Every failure in the plan was a data point. Every obstacle was a message. The only question was whether the man receiving those messages was trained to read them or trained only to follow instructions. The Germans were trained to follow instructions. Leach was trained to read. The bridge at Pont St. Vincent still stands. You can walk it. It is unremarkable, a stone span over a river in a part of France that tourists pass through on their way to somewhere else. There is no plaque, no marker, no indication that on a November night in 1944, 12 American soldiers crossed a river in a stolen, flat-bottomed boat and changed the shape of the war in Lorraine by ignoring the plan that was supposed to win it. But if you look at the eastern foundation stone, the anchor on the far bank, the one the Germans fortified and Leach crept past in the dark, there is, carved faintly into the limestone above the waterline, a set of initials, JL Nov 44. Who carved it and when has never been confirmed. But Leach's daughter, Ruth, visited the bridge in 1998. She was 58 years old. She ran her fingers over the letters. She stood there for a while. Then she took a photograph. She never said what she thought about when she looked at the water. Some things belong to the people who were there. If your father, grandfather, or great-grandfather served in the European theater, in Third Army, in the Lorraine campaign, anywhere along the Moselle, I want to hear about it in the comments. What unit? What campaign? Where did they end up? Those stories live in family memory and nowhere else, and this channel exists to make sure they don't disappear. Tell us.